Oh hey everybody, it's finally the end of a journey. We have done it. We've done 100 years of movies. We've went from 1918 to finally we're ending it in 2018. But today we're talking about 2012 to 2018. It's my last few years of this 100 years of movie series. Thank you so much everybody. I'm so appreciative of everyone who stuck this through the entire beginning all the way to the end. If you haven't seen any of the other ones, this is where I go from my favorite movie every single year, from, you know, obviously all the way 1918 to 2018. So today we're covering the last bit of that. And so thank you so much for checking this video out. So let's just get into this because it's going to be a very long video. I'm going to do all my honorable mentions and then I'm going to talk about my favorite movie of each respective year. So another thing I want to say is thank you Chris Hurtado, who is my friend. He's been on the channel before. He got me this for Christmas. It's a little Janus Films shirt, and I really like it, and I much appreciate it. He actually has a channel, and I'm going to put that in the link down in the description down below. Check it out if you haven't. He just started his own YouTube channel himself. He's just beginning, but he's doing really great work. So let's get into 2012. My favorite honorable mentions from 2012. Let's go there now. Alright, so I'm going to try to be as quick as possible with 2012 because there's a lot to talk about. So the first one that I have of my honorable mentions is 21 Jump Street. So 21 Jump Street is a remake of a television series. It used to be like Johnny Depp was in it, and now we have Channing Tatum and Jonah Hill. It's just this really fun kind of a remake of the show that is a movie now, and it's a really fun one, and if you haven't seen it, check it out. All right, next is a movie that I was blown away by. I actually saw it 4 times in theaters, and this is Marvel's Avengers. This is the first time you actually see a team-up movie actually pay off, and Joss Whedon did a fantastic job of directing all these people. We had Robert Downey Jr., we have Chris Hemsworth, we have Chris Evans, we have Mark Ruffalo as the new Bruce Banner. We also had, I'm blanking, Jeremy Renner and Scarlett Johansson. Really great movie. I really love this movie. Haven't checked out Marvel's Avengers. This is where it all kind of became a reality. So check this one out. Alright, next, moving on from there to another honorable mention, we have Cloud Atlas. This is actually a film that I watched before I read the book. The book is way better, but the movie really blew me away. I really enjoyed how this story was told. It jumped around kind of like a book between 6 different storylines, all interconnected. This was made by the Wachowskis. I think one of them was in transition at this time. It doesn't really matter, but they did a fantastic job, at least in my book, with Halle Berry, Tom Hanks, Hugo Weaving, just to name a few. Hugh Grant's in this film as well. There's a lot of different people in this movie, and I really enjoyed this movie. I love the score of it. I actually used to own it on record. And so check out Cloud Atlas if you haven't seen it, because it's a really great time, and it's a long one, but it's worth your time. And definitely go read the book, because it's really fantastic. Alright, next we're moving on to a film that I watched for the first time this year, and it's Such a Beautiful Day by Don Hertzfeldt. Now this is a short animated story, and it's a really crazy trip. It's really hard to explain. You can actually find a lot of this stuff on YouTube itself, but I got the Blu-ray copy, and it also comes with a bunch of other cool things as well, and other short films by this creator. But it is just in the life of Bill, who is this, you know, down on his day, kind of just a certain specific day, and events transpire, and this thing. It's a very psychedelic trip. It's a very serious trip. It's a very dramatized trip. I highly recommend checking this out if you have not seen it. Go look it up on YouTube if you can. Otherwise, you know, go get it. Alright, next we're going to a Danish film with Mads Mikkelsen. We have The Hunt. This is a phenomenal foreign language film. It's one of the ones that I actually got back in 2012, I think, around that time, 2013. I really love the performances by Mads Mikkelsen as a school teacher who is wrongly convicted of a sexual assault with this kindergartner. I think he's a school teacher, and he takes care of these kids, and so it kind of just gets down to this witch hunt for Mads Mikkelsen's character, and we have to kind of see all those events unfold as we try to figure out the mystery here, and it's just really phenomenal. It's all in Danish, so I would recommend you checking it out, even if you don't want to read foreign films. So check this one out, because it's one of the better ones. Next was one of my favorite films from 2012 back in the day, but I really like it still, and that is Looper. This is with Bruce Willis and Joseph Gordon-Levitt. It's kind of got, like, you know, a gangster type of film connected with time travel, and, you know, it's like a hitman film as well. It's a lot of really crazy things going on in this, and there's some sci-fi elements as well, so there's a lot of really cool things. It's directed by Ryan Johnson, who kind of let me down with Last Jedi. but I really like this movie, and I really like Brick. So he's worked with Joseph Gordon-Levitt before, so you know this is a good film. So check out Looper if you haven't seen it. Next is a film that maybe has been a little bit under the radar for a lot of people, but a Late Quartet. This is with a lot of really fantastic people. We have Philip Seymour Hoffman, we have Christoph Waltz, we also have Catherine Keener, and then we have the fourth man, who I'm going to be looking at the back right here, Mark Eifner. And so these are a quartet. Two of them are husband and wife, and two of them have they've all been playing for a long time together. You just get some familial and also friendship drama involved with this, and it just kind of unfolds from there. It's a really great take, and really smart indie film that has really great score. Obviously, it's about classical music, so it's got to be good. And so I'd highly recommend checking out Late Quartet. I probably undersold it, but you need to watch this movie because it's really phenomenal and no one really knows about it. So check out Late Quartet. I'm going to be putting that in the description down below. Alright, next we're going to go to a P.T. Anderson film, The Master. Now this one is about Scientology, more or less. So we got Joaquin Phoenix and Philip Seymour Hoffman once again in this really great, kind of psychedelic, kind of crazy, unhinged film with a lot of phenomenal scenes, and P.T. Anderson knows how to get dialogue out of his actors and also in his story. And so it's one of those movies I don't really revisit too often, but it's one of those movies that definitely sticks with you if you've seen it. So it's got amazing performances, it's got a really interesting story, and I highly recommend checking out P.T. Anderson's The Master. Alright, next we're going to kind of an indie romantic drama. I don't know how to describe it, but this is based on a book, Perks of Being a Wallflower. We got Ezra Miller, we got Emma Watson, and we also have Logan Lerman. It's just about this kid who is just going through, this coming-of-age story of this kid in high school trying to befriend some other weirdos and just trying to make it through it. And there's a lot of really great moments and a lot of sad moments, but a lot of real moments in it. And so it's a really fantastic movie. And I highly recommend checking this out. I need to read the book still, but check out the film if you haven't seen it. Next is a movie that maybe has a little bit of a controversy attached to it, because some people don't see it in the same light as I do, but I really enjoyed Prometheus. Ridley Scott came back to the Alien universe with this film. Not really about Alien at all, but until the very end, and it kind of pissed off a lot of people. But in my opinion, I thought this was one of the more clever takes, even though the scientists made all the dumbest mistakes in the world. But, it's a movie, so we're led to believe these events are kind of what makes things interesting, right? And so obviously we wouldn't make the same mistakes, but you would think after years and years of training that these scientists would, kind of follow the things that they should know better. Anyway, Prometheus, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really clever take on the Alien franchise, and they kind of botched it with Alien Covenant, but here we are. Alright, next we're moving on to a really crazy film in Resolution. Now, if you haven't checked this one out, it's kind of hard to describe because it's something you need to watch. But we have two individuals, they're lifelong friends, but one of them has a really bad addiction problem to drugs, and he is found by his other friend out in the middle of the desert in New Mexico. And what happens is he chains them to the shack where they're living in a reservation, and a lot of really crazy things start happening just on the peripheral. And you'll see what I mean if you haven't seen it or check it out. There's actually a kind of continuation of this story. This is made by two really fantastic directors, and I'm going to be looking it up because I'll talk about them in a second, actually. But this is made by Vincent and Moorhead. So Justin Vincent and Aaron Scott Moorhead, they are two directors that I think you should check out more of their stuff. We'll talk about Spring in a second. So check out Resolution if you haven't seen it. I thought this was one of the most clever sci-fi films I've ever seen. I just gave you a hint with sci-fi, didn't I? Alright, last three honorable mentions. 2012, I know, it's going to be a long video. Seven Psychopaths. I love Martin McDonagh. To the side, you can't see it right now, I have in Bruges. I've talked about that movie a million times. This is this follow-up, and we also have Colin Farrell in it. Once again, we have Christoph Waltz, we have Woody Harrelson, and we also have Sam Rockwell. But we also have Tom Waits in here as well, along with Avi Cornish and Olga Kurylenko, which I can't ever say. Anyway, this is a really fun film, all involving a little dog and just all these crazy people. And you kind of see them all unhinged and come together, and this is really dark black comedy, and highly recommend checking this movie out. Everything that McDonagh's ever done is phenomenal, and so this is one of them, just to add to another list. So check this movie out if you haven't seen Seven Psychopaths. It's a really fun one. The last honorable mention is the last of a trilogy that I really, really enjoy. The Cornetto trilogy. We have The World's End. So you have Hot Fuzz and Shaun of the Dead there with it. Edgar Wright did a fantastic work on these 3 movies that are really not connected, except for the fact they have Simon Pegg and Nick, which I can't think of his last name. What's his last name? Nick Frost. I know these things. And so with World's End, he's a bunch of buddies who want to go back to their hometown to finish this thing they call The World's End, where they go to different taverns, I think 12 of them, and they're trying to complete it all in one night and have a beer from each one. And every single time it kind of just ends. But this movie involves a little bit of a sci-fi twist as well, other than just the drinking part, which, you'll see. So if you haven't seen The World's End or Hot Fuzz or Shaun of the Dead, check these movies out. I didn't mention those earlier on when I talked about honorable mentions, but all of these movies are fantastic. I would honestly rank them in order, in my opinion, but they're really good. So, where does this come to our favorite movie of 2012, and that is Django Unchained. This is probably one of my favorite Quentin Tarantino films. I love Jamie Foxx's performance, as well as Leonardo DiCaprio and Christoph Waltz. They all do phenomenal work. Sam Jackson plays a really, really great, I guess, Uncle Tom, per se, in this particular instance. Under the tutelage of Candy, Mr. Candy, we have him right there as Mr. Candy, Leonardo DiCaprio, and you see Christoph Waltz as this doctor who's more or less a tooth doctor, a dentist, who's helping out Jamie Foxx in kind of this spaghetti western, revision the westerns that we've seen before, where the black guy just destroys everybody and gets a lot of vengeance. And it's really, really great fun, really fantastic dialogue. I really loved a lot of the scenes in this movie, especially the KKK scene. That part just makes me laugh every single time I watch this movie. There's a lot of really bloody vengeance you see near the very last half of this film. You also see a lot of things that are related to plantations and whippings and, being attacked by dogs. We have all sorts of horrific things going on in this movie, but through the lens of kind of just like a vengeance kind of revenge type of film. And I really love how Tarantino made this possible. It's definitely a retake. It's kind of like Inglourious Basterds, where he kind of revisions history in a way that helps a little bit of our modern morality. And so I thought that was really, really cool. So I absolutely love this movie. This is why it's my favorite movie from 2012. Django Unchained is just highly rewatchable. A lot of really great characters in it. It's just a really, really fun movie. It's definitely a dark film, but at the same time, it's lighthearted as well, and you get a lot a bang out of your buck for this film. So check out Django Unchained if you haven't seen it. That's my favorite film from 2012. So let's go to 2013, some more honorable mentions. Alright, so moving from 2012 to 2013, we have a little bit of connection between Django Unchained and 12 Years a Slave. Chiwetel Ejiofor plays this phenomenal role in this Steve McQueen directed film that I think is just fantastic and also brutal and really, really hard to watch, because unlike Django Unchained, where we kind of see the history a little bit revisioned, this is kind of what it actually was. And a lot of this stuff that goes down is really, really hard to watch. And there's a lot of really phenomenal performances, especially by Ejiofor, like I said. Paul Dano plays a really great character in this movie. Brad Pitt's even in it, even though he's not really much of a character in the film. We also have Michael Fassbender as well, Benedict Cumberbatch. We have Lupita Nyong'o, Paul Giamatti, Sarah Paulson, and Alfre Woodard. There's a lot I'm just reading from. This is a hard movie to watch, but a necessary movie to watch. And there's one scene in particular that really stuck with me in my mind, and it involves a tree and a rope and a noose. And so this movie is really, really powerful, but I absolutely recommend checking this movie out if you have not seen it. But like I said, it's a hard movie to watch. Next, we're moving on to another film. This one is Ain't Them Body Saints with Casey Affleck and Rooney Mara, and also we have Ben Foster. This is a really, really phenomenal film, directed by one of my favorite directors, David Lowery, and this is just a really, really great kind of modern Western. And you can kind of see the imprints of things like Hell or High Water in Ben Foster's character, who, plays this a little bit later on. But this movie is just a really, really great story about bank robbers and the justice, and then a romance as well. And so it's just a lot of really crazy things going on. If you haven't checked this movie out, I'd highly recommend checking Ain't Them Body Saints. David Lowery, eat your heart out. He's just one of those directors that he's just really made an imprint on me, at least. So check this movie out if you haven't seen it. Next, we're moving on from there to a really great, fantastic solo performance by Robert Redford. All Is Lost. This movie I really enjoyed. There's hardly any dialogue in this. Like, I mean, like really minimal. You got this guy on this boat, and you kind of just see him go through the trials and tribulations of him being by himself, kind of just thinking about his life, his past, what he's currently going through. It's just a really great character study, and Robert Redford, in his nonverbals, just does such a fantastic work in this film. Just you can see the anguish and the pain, and also just the the triumph and all those other things, positive and negative, throughout this movie. And I think this movie, to me, is life-affirming. Kind of gives you that push, the reason to live. So I really love this movie quite a bit. All Is Lost, check it out. Now we're moving on to a film that is like Batman in real life, Blue Ruin. This is directed by Jeremy Saulnier. This is a really fantastic film. It's a very big vengeance film. So you have this character who is unhinged, who has been serving his time in prison and jail, and he's coming back for vengeance, and he's going to take out the person who ruined his entire life. And so check this movie out if you haven't. I don't know if it's on Netflix or not, but if it's not, check it out in the description down below. Go buy that. This movie is phenomenal, and we're going to talk about Green Room in a little bit, but this is his first film that he directed, at least I think. He might have directed something before it, Murder Party, possibly. I don't know. Blue Ruin, really great movie. Check it out. Moving on from there, we have a really heart-wrenching story of Fruitvale Station. This is Brian Coogler's first film. We have Michael B. Jordan, who, from Creed and also Black Panther. This is a really great movie of, unfortunately, a true story of this person, and I'm going to say his name, Oscar Grant, who was shot tragically for honestly no reason whatsoever. And you kind of see just the last day of his life, what he's going through with his friends, his family. But it's a really shocking portrait, and also just a really well-made film that ends in a tragic note. You kind of know that the whole time, but if you haven't checked out Fruitvale Station, I think it's Brian Coogler's best work, personally, and so I highly recommend checking this movie out. If you haven't seen it, it's got a really great performance by Michael B. Jordan, so that's a really great movie to check out. Alright, next on honorable mentions is something I'm going to eventually get up to a Criterion level. Ensign Llewyn Davis, Oscar Isaac plays this folk singer. It's kind of a fictional story, directed and written by Joel and Ethan Coen, so you got to know it's good, a great film. This is a really phenomenal film with Justin Timberlake in it as well, Carey Mulligan. We have Garrett Hedlund and John Goodman as well. And it's just a really phenomenal cast, really phenomenal music, and just really great performances all around, especially of the folk scene back in the 1960s and 70s, I want to say. Yeah, 61, so I was right. So check out Inside Llewyn Davis if you haven't checked it out before. It's a really great movie, and it's one of the Ethan and Joel's best works, in my opinion. Next movie we're going to talk about, we shift to a kaiju movie. We have Pacific Rim. So this movie is directed by Guillermo del Toro. This is probably one of the best monster robot films that I've ever seen in my life, because it actually cares about the characters. You flesh out a little bit of their story, and you know it's not just a big bam shoot 'em up Transformers movie, which I'm not a fan of at all. And if anyone is a fan of those Transformers movies, I'm sorry, you're in the wrong place. But Pacific Rim is just a really great movie. It's really dark, and I just really love the performances by Charlie Day, Ron Perlman, and just Charlie Hunnam's actually not that bad in this movie as well. Check out Pacific Rim if you haven't seen it. It's a really great film. Next, we're moving on to an independent film by none other than Ben Stiller, and that is A Secret Life of Walter Mitty. I really love this movie. It's just about a guy who's stuck in his head all the time, just imagining really crazy scenarios, and you kind of just see it out in this really great film. And it just puts a smile on my face every time I watch it. And Ben Stiller is just, he works for a magazine that's going out of business. High Life magazine, I want to say. High Life? I can't remember what particular magazine he works for. But it's just, he's working for this company, and he's about to lose his job. He also has no one in his life. He kind of likes Kristen Wiig quite a bit, and is going around the world, more or less, just to find this photograph for his magazine because he deals with that, and he can't find this last photograph, and so he's just on this trip, but also daydreaming at the same time. So it's just a really fantastical, kind of just nice romantic story, and I really love this movie. It puts a smile on my face every time I watch it. So check out The Secret Life of Walter Mitty if you haven't seen it. Also a gorgeous, lovely cover right here. So another honorable mention is this really hilarious movie that I don't care if you don't like it or not, but this is the end. We have Seth Rogen in the gang. We have James Franco. We have Jonah Hill, Seth Rogen, like I said, again, Jay Baruchel, Danny McBride, Craig Robinson, Michael Cera, and Emma Watson. We also have Rihanna in here as well, and you know, Jason Segel. A lot of really fun characters. They're all playing themselves at this party at the end of the world. They're having this party. The end of the world starts happening. It gets really, really crazy. Really messed up scenarios. Really, really funny one-liners. Really memorable moments that are definitely raunchy. All kind of pop-driven, and a lot of just really crazy things that I really, really love. And I had a really, really great time when I watched this back in the theaters back in the day, and I thought this movie was just worth mentioning. So this is the end. One of my favorite funny comedy movies about Armageddon. So check this movie out if you haven't seen it. All right, now we're going to the realm of a really terrifying but really, really great film, Under the Skin. This got Scarlett Johansson, who is from another world. She's in the skin of this really attractive woman, leading men to their deaths. You don't exactly know what for. This movie has so much atmosphere and a great haunting score, and you are definitely disenchanted. Well, you're more enchanted, I suppose, by what's going on, but also left a little uncomfortable. It's a really, really great sci-fi take on something of a slow burn, but it's just a really, really great movie. If you haven't checked out Under the Skin, check this movie out if you haven't. All right, last two honorable mentions. Just like with The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, when I'm down, I will always want to see this movie. That is The Way, Way Back. I absolutely love this movie. Sam Rockwell plays this lifeguard who was taking care of this kid. This kid's kind of it's during the summer. They're on summer vacation. They live at their kind of like condo resort on the beach. Steve Carell is this stepfather-like character, kind of a boyfriend of, we have Toni Collette, who is his actual mother, and they don't really get along. Steve Carell and this kid right here, who I'm going to be looking at his name, Liam James, who's the main character of this movie. And so he starts working at this aqua water park for Sam Rockwell. And Sam Rockwell kind of takes on the father role figure, even though he's a kid himself, and he's just letting this kid just like live his life and taking away from the craziness of his everyday situation. It's just a movie that makes me smile every time I watch it. A lot of really crazy moments in it, but it's just a really, really fantastic movie. It's made by the same people who made Little Miss Sunshine and Juno, but I just really love this movie. So check out Little Miss Sunshine. Now the last honorable mention is a movie that I really love by Martin Scorsese. I watched it a couple times in theaters because I liked it so much. That is The Wolf of Wall Street. We have Leonardo DiCaprio playing this real-life character who conned a lot of people into this scheme of his, making millions and millions of dollars. Billions maybe, I don't even remember. But there's a lot of fuck words in this movie. In fact, it has the record, if I recall, for the most swears in it. And I just really love this really long movie filled with Martin Scorsese-isms. Just a lot of really, really crazy, ridiculous things. We have drugs, we have sex, we have violence. It's all Martin Scorsese. We even have a little bit of religion in there as well. You know, it's what Martin Scorsese is known for. There's a few scenes in this movie that just crack me up. One of them involves a certain little drug that kicks in a little bit later than it should, and it's not legal anymore, Quaaludes, even though I'm pretty sure Quaaludes were never legal, but they were definitely really big during this time period. So check out Wolf of Wall Street if you haven't. Now let's talk about my favorite movie from 2013, and that is Prisoners. Prisoners is one of my favorite movies. Again, directed by Denis Villeneuve. This movie, starring Hugh Jackman and Jake Gyllenhaal, Paul Dano as well. We also have Viola Davis. We have Terrence Howard. We have Melissa Leo. And we also have Marin Bello. This movie is about a cop and a father. The father loses his daughter. She gets abducted somehow, and they are on the hunt to try to figure out who took his daughter. And there's a lot of vigilante justice that potentially happens in this movie. There's a lot of vigilante, so he takes it on himself to figure out who this is, because the cops aren't doing jack shit. And so there's some vigilante justice involved, and it's just a really, really hard movie to watch. Really drastic and gritty take on the things happening in this movie. And I absolutely love it. The atmosphere of this movie is just really dark, and it's really gorgeous. The cinematography is top notch. Roger Deakins did the cinematography on it, so you know it's great. And so I just really love this film. Based on the performances by Hugh Jackman, especially Paul Dano. This is probably one of my favorite Paul Dano performances ever. Just Paul Dano playing this really, really ugly character. When I say that, I mean in his character itself. And Jake Gyllenhaal does a phenomenal job as well. And there's just a really, really great atmosphere to this movie, and a really gritty and a really hard to watch film. In fact, I used to have this poster lining up somewhere around here, but I don't have enough room right now. But check out Prisoners if you have not seen it. This is Denis Villeneuve's Prisoners. This is my favorite movie from 2013. So let's go on to 2014. Alright, moving on straight along from 2013 to 2014, we actually have quite a bit more honorable mentions, so I'm going to try to be as quick as possible with these as quickly as I can. The first one being 99 Homes. This is with fantastic performances done by Michael Shannon and Andrew Garfield. This is just a really, really great story of an unfortunate true event of the 2009-2010 kind of housing crisis. And I actually think this is the superior film to Big Short, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But I really, really love 99 Homes, especially Michael Shannon playing this despicable man who's just foreclosing houses, taking people out of their... But, I mean, obviously it's his job, but he's kind of doing it on kind of an independent circuit, and Andrew Garfield is one of those victims who eventually joins him and tries to more or less save his mother and his own family. And so you see a really, really great character drama here in 99 Homes, and I highly recommend checking this movie out if you haven't seen it or heard of it, so check it out and put it down in the description down below. Next is the Oscar-winning film from the year, Birdman. This is Alexander Inarritu's film. This is a really, really fantastic movie, and we have a really great performance by Michael Keaton, who is a down-on-the-luck movie star trying to figure out his life on Broadway, and this really, really great jazz score that's just like constantly going... It's just constantly going from changing from scene to scene. It looks like it's a continuous one-shot, and it's not, but it's just, the camera work is fantastic, as Inarritu always does. So check out Birdman if you haven't seen it. It's definitely worth a mention, definitely an honorable mention here. Next, we're going to talk about one of my favorite filmmakers, and that is Richard Linklater, in the film Boyhood. Now, this is a really groundbreaking film. I'm eventually going to get this on Criterion, but this movie actually follows 12 years of this kid. This actual kid from his youth all the way up to his teenage years, and this movie has Patricia Arquette, Lorelai Linklater, and Ethan Hawke in it as well. So you have Lorelai, who is Linklater's daughter. L.R. Coltrane is the kid in this movie, and you actually get Linklater working 12 years on this movie, taking year by year the development of this fictional story, but it's just really, really cool and really, really well done. It kind of is a lot... I honestly think that Coltrane's performances are better earlier on. As he gets older, it kind of slips away from that, but the premise of this entire story, or just like the background behind it, is what's so amazing about this movie. And I just think it's just a phenomenal thing that we don't really ever see much of. So check out Boyhood if you haven't seen it. Richard Linklater is one of those directors who just really understands time. And as you can see right behind me, I don't know if you can see it before trilogy, Linklater knows all about time. So check this movie out if you haven't. Next is one of my favorite Marvel films, actually, in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and this is Captain America Winter Soldier. This is one of the first times where we actually had kind of like an espionage spy thriller in the entire series, and this is about Captain America. Obviously, we have Falcon is introduced in this one particularly, but this movie is really, really fantastic, and it's trying to figure out the mystery behind Winter Soldier, his Bucky Barnes, his friend, who is mysteriously still alive somehow, and also doing evil things. And so you see that, you just see the character development of Captain America trying to figure out to save his friend, and also just, save the day. So it's just one of those films that I honestly think was a breath of fresh air for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and is definitely the Russo brothers' start, and you can see them with Infinity War later on, just how well these brothers know what they're doing. And so I absolutely love this movie, and it's definitely one of the best ones of the entire series and the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe. If you haven't seen Winter Soldier, you should check this movie out. It's really great. Next, we're actually going to Iran to a film called A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. This movie is an Iranian vampire film. It's shot in black and white and is really, really well made. Very atmospheric, really dark. You have this woman who's in a burqa who is a vampire, and in this town that's like kind of a ghost town where a lot of prostitutes and just people who are just on the underbellings of society, and you just see a lot of just really crazy things go on in this movie. I thought it was executed very, very well, and I really love this Kino Lorber package as well. And so, but I'm not here to unpackage it. I just wanted to mention it. So check out this movie if you haven't seen it. I'm going to have this down in the description down below. This is one of the better vampire movies I've ever seen. It's really, really fantastic. It's Iranian, like I said. So we have a little bit of some subtitles if you haven't, speak the language itself. So check this movie out if you haven't seen it. Next, we have a David Fincher directed film starring Ben Affleck and Rosamund Pike. This movie is just a really crazy story. The book I have not read. This is a movie based on the book itself. David Fincher has this really fantastic, drenched atmosphere in this movie itself. The cinematography is really top notch. So is the story. A lot of backstabbing, a lot of just drama between these two characters. A girl who goes missing, and you kind of just see the mystery unravel from here. And David Fincher does a really fantastic job of building that suspense and that tension, trying to unhinge and figure out all of the things that go on with it. Next is the other Marvel movie I want to talk about this year, and that is Guardians of the Galaxy. This is a game changer. This is one of those films that, we had Avengers earlier on. Now we have Guardians of the Galaxy, which is this ragtag team of people we've never met before. James Gunn did a phenomenal job of getting these cast members together. We have Groot, who is played by Vin Diesel. We have Rocket Raccoon, the raccoon, played by Bradley Cooper. We have Zoe Saldana as Gamora. We have Dave Bautista, who used to be a wrestler and just a phenomenal actor now, as Drax. And then we also have Chris Pratt as Star-Lord. These are the people we, as a comic book fan myself, I haven't been, too familiar with Guardians of the Galaxy, so this really threw everyone out for a loop. This is just a really ragtag team, and it's a really, really fun movie. If you haven't seen it, it's one of the funniest movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and it's definitely one of the best original takes. So check out Guardians of the Galaxy if you haven't seen it. Alright, moving on from there, we have a film directed by Spike Jonze, starring Joaquin Phoenix, and that movie is called Her. And this movie is Joaquin Phoenix, who's in love with his operating system. It's kind of like a Siri in a way, but he falls in love with this operating system because he cannot find love in real life, and it's just this really interesting take on modern technology on top of just our indescribable loneliness a lot of us have, because we feel so connected with things like this, like YouTube and our smartphone, and we're constantly online or talking to somebody, but we don't really confront a lot of the things that this movie confronts. So I highly recommend checking out Her. Kind of got on a side rant there, but let's just keep moving on forward from there to another honorable mention, How to Train Your Dragon 2. This movie, like I said last time, How to Train Your Dragon, both these movies make you cry, and Disney Pixar knows how to do that, so that's all I'm going to say about this movie. I love these adventures, and I really can't wait for the third one. I just recently saw the trailer. If it's as good as the first two, I think it's going to be one of the best trilogies there is. So, anyway, moving on from there to a film about a real-life character in The Imitation Game, based on a true story. Alan Turing, who is the really famous mathematician that pretty much made the computer, all in time to destroy the Germans in World War II. He did a lot of the decoding during that time period, but after the fact, he kind of perfected this code, and you see the real-life story of Alan Turing, a little Hollywoodized, of course, with Benedict Cumberbatch and Keira Knightley in it as well. But it's a really, really fantastic take, and I honestly thought this was really great drama of a biopic of someone who a lot of people don't really still know about, because he's one of the first gay scientists out there, and a lot of people just don't talk about him. So Alan Turing and The Imitation Game. Check this movie out if you haven't seen it. Alright, next is actually probably my favorite Nolan film, and I know this is a disagreement for a lot of people, but Interstellar. I absolutely love this movie. It talks about transcending time. Obviously, love, and on top of just the human condition, just transfers over a life period. It definitely is a movie that expands upon the imagination a little bit. It's definitely Hollywoodized and like is not scientifically accurate per se, but it's definitely one of those movies that I really, really enjoy. And I recall having a memory from the first time I watched it. I actually came home with my old roommates back in the day when this movie came out, and we all watched it like 10 o'clock at night at the IMAX, and we're just blown away by it. We didn't like go to bed for, you know, at least 3 hours. Afterwards, we just kept talking about all the implications and the things involved in this movie. Christopher Nolan did a really fantastic job of making this movie, and Matthew McConaughey did a really great job with the performance. Matt Damon did fantastic. Jessica Chastain, Michael Caine, and Anne Hathaway as well, just playing just all these fantastic characters, and just showing you that humanity can transcend across space. And so check out Interstellar if you haven't seen it. Next, we're moving on to a horror film, one of the best horror films of the last decade or two, and It Follows. This movie kind of follows the premise of Halloween in the sense that you have a danger that you can see coming, with a really great score, but you can't tell exactly what that danger is, particularly in this film. But It Follows is this thing that you transmit sexually, to a partner, and this thing is coming after you to kill you. And so what you have to do is more or less have sex with somebody, and that transfers over to that person until that person's dead. Then it goes back to the person before it. It's just this really long chain. We don't really know how it started, but this is how the movie kind of just starts off, and it's just a really, really cool kind of cat and mouse game that you see coming, and the score is really phenomenal. It definitely has a lot of 80s elements to it, and it's just one of those movies that it's just really, really clever and really, really smart, and I absolutely recommend checking out It Follows if you have not seen it. Alright, next we're going on to another honorable mention. This one is one of the best shoot-'em-up movies ever, and I was really late to the party, and that is John Wick. Keanu Reeves plays this amazing badass, the Baba Yaga, the boogeyman, who loses his wife early on in the film, gets a puppy, he loses the puppy, and he loses his mind. And that's all I'm going to say about John Wick, because I'm sure you know about it, but check this movie out if you haven't. It's one of the best action movies that I've seen in a long, long time, so check out John Wick. Alright, next, moving on from another honorable mention. This movie is one of my favorite animated movies of this particular year. That is the Lego Movie. Chris Pratt does a really, really great job of playing this character. Will Arnett as Batman, and there's a lot of other people in this movie. It's just a really, really fun film that has a lot of just great heart to it, and it's also meant for adults and children alike. And, you know, as a kid who played with Legos and even Mega Bloks, I have some good memories with things like this, and to see it with a story about this guy who's just really mundane, and it gets a little bit more fantastical and a lot crazier with a lot of different references. It's really fun times, if you have not seen that. So we're moving on from there to Jake Gyllenhaal unhinged in Nightcrawler. This movie is starring Jake Gyllenhaal, who plays this nighttime reporter. He more or less wants to become famous or infamous, so he's not really getting noticed by anybody, so he starts doing crazier and crazier things, bending what journalists actually do, kind of involving himself in a lot of the situations and scenarios that he wants to get a part of, eventually, you know, starting his own things and his own stories just to get, you know, there on time, be one of the first people to respond. He's just this cameraman who wants to get these crazy things, you know, murders, robberies, you name it, a lot of the things that happen at night. And it engulfs his entire being in this movie, and it's just a really fantastic movie, and you just see from start to finish this transition that happens in Jake Gyllenhaal's character. So check out Nightcrawler if you have not seen it. Alright, so let's finish off those honorable mentions real quick. We have Elizabeth Moss and Mark Duplass in the movie The One I Love. I really love this movie because it is a romantic film with some sci-fi elements. It's these two people who are, this couple that are having a hard time, and they go out to this retreat, and then they see their doppelgangers, and things get a little unhinged. It's a really fun time. If you haven't seen The One I Love, I definitely highly recommend checking this out. It's a really good romantic mystery sci-fi. So Next, we're talking about a really charming film that I spent way too long not watching. That's Paddington, and I finally watched this movie. I didn't really grow up with Paddington, however, so that's why it wasn't really that interesting to me, but I've heard so many people tell me about it, and so I finally checked it out, and I finally saw this and Paddington 2. I am in love with these movies, and they're so charming, and it's so nice, and it's a breath of fresh air. So check out Paddington if you haven't seen it. Alright, next on the honorable mentions is, we talked about Moorhead and Vincent a little earlier. This film is Spring. Now this movie is like the kind of the tagline over here under this. It's Richard Linklater meets H.P. Lovecraft. So I'm not going to give too much away, but it's kind of like the Before trilogy, where you have this guy who's in love with this girl in Europe, but there's something horror slash science fiction about it all. And you'll see if you watch this movie. I highly recommend checking out Spring if you haven't seen it. It's a really, really fun movie, and it's really, really great. So check out this if you haven't seen it. Next is two of my favorite films of this particular year. The first one is What We Do in the Shadows. This is one of my favorite vampire mockumentaries I've ever seen. Taika Waititi directed this movie. And stars in it as well. Just a hilarious, hilarious movie. Imagine Flight of the Conchords meets the American Office. And even the British Office. It's just so dry, but it's just so good. And then we also have Jermaine Clemens in it, among other people as well, from Flight of the Conchords as well. So this is just a really great vampire mockumentary, and I highly recommend checking this movie out if you haven't seen it. Alright, the last honorable mention we're going to talk about is Miles Teller and Jake Simmons in Whiplash. This movie is intense, so intense. I just love this movie about Miles Teller, who is this music student who is going to this highly prestigious music school. J.K. Simmons is the instructor for this particular band, and this jazz band, and J.K. Simmons is just a fucking prick. And is just an asshole, but at the same time, he comes across as like he cares, but it's just that back and forth between him and Miles Teller. It's one of the best movies that I've seen for this particular year, and I highly recommend checking out Whiplash. And it's not quite my tempo for this next film, but you'll see. Alright, so my favorite film for 2014. That is Wes Anderson's Grand Budapest Hotel. Now let me tell you a little story about this movie. I've seen films like Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou growing up. I even saw Moonrise Kingdom, which I did not really care for. So I had a really bad taste of Wes Anderson in my mouth early on in my childhood. And I eventually watched this movie just randomly because we had a subscription to HBO that ended ended in like a month when I was living with my two other roommates. And I checked this movie out, and I was just blown away how hilarious and witty this movie was. Ralph Fiennes alone carried this movie for me. Now, Ralph Fiennes is just one among the many people in this movie. We have Jay Murray Abraham, Matthew Almarac, Adrian Brody, Jude Law, Harvey Keitel, Jeff Goldblum, Willem Dafoe, Bill Murray, Edward Norton, Saoirse Ronan, can't ever say her name, Jason Schwartzman, Tony Revolori, Owen Wilson, who's always in a Wes Anderson movie, Tom Wilkinson, Tilda Swinton, and Leah Seydoux. These movies, this movie has a cast of reoccurring Wes Anderson people, but it's just a really, really smart, really fun, crazy adventure with a lot of just ridiculous situations and scenarios involving paintings, who owns this hotel in the middle of nowhere, and it's just really, really funny, and I highly recommend checking this movie out. It's the movie that changed my mind about Wes Anderson, and it actually happens to be my favorite one by Wes Anderson because it changed my mind so much, and it was just such a rewatchable film. So check out Grand Budapest Hotel. This is my pick for 2014. Alright, let's move straight along to 2015. So let's go from there to, we have the first film being The Big Short. Now this is a movie directed by Adam McKay, who's going to have Vice out in a little bit. I think it comes out this next week here, particularly where I live. This is starring Christian Bale, Steve Carell, Ryan Gosling, Brad Pitt. This is the real-life story of the housing crisis and all the different players involved. It's a really, really smart, really funny, and really dramatic take on this entire housing crisis, and it kind of puts down it in layman's terms for everybody who doesn't really understand what went down. So it's a really fun movie. I highly recommend checking out Big Short. I have a personal love for Christian Bale in this movie because he loves metal and he listens to Mastodon and things like it, and Slayer, and I'm all about that. So check out Big Short if you haven't seen it. Next on my honorable mentions list is a really great new Western, Bone Tomahawk. This is starring Kurt Russell. I said Kent Russell. I don't know why I said that. Kurt Russell, Patrick Wilson, Matthew Fox, and Richard Jenkins. So this is a really great cast of just people who have been in things like this. And I just really love how dark and gritty this movie is. There's a really messed up scene near the end. It's definitely like a horror Western. A lot of the horror involved in this is like kind of gruesome at the very, very end of the movie. So check out this Western if you haven't seen it. It's a really great movie, and I highly recommend it. It's definitely a different take on the genre, and it's a lot darker, so it's really good. Alright, moving on from there is a nice lighter tone of the film, and that is Brooklyn. And that is with Saoirse Ronan. And we also have Domhnall Gleeson, Emery Cohen, Jim Broadbent, and Julie Walters. This movie is just about Irish immigration back in the kind of late 1800s, early 1900s. This particularly, I think, is like the turn of the century time period. And she comes over from Ireland. And this is just a really nice romantic story, but also just like a drama story of Saoirse Ronan, and it's really delightful. It's got a really great score to it, really pretty cinematography, and it's a really nice and charming little story here. I absolutely love it. All right, next is a Ryan Coogler film, his second film, and the first in the reboot of Rocky. This is Creed. This movie is phenomenal. It's Michael B. Jordan, Sylvester Stallone. Sylvester Stallone does a really phenomenal job. In fact, he was nominated for Best Supporting Actor in this particular role. But Michael B. Jordan steals the show, and so does the camera work in this movie. Ryan Coogler's camera work for just all the shots, you feel everything in this movie. And it was just such a triumphant take. Rocky Balboa kind of left like a mixed review, a mixed taste in people's mouth on the whole Rocky franchise. I personally liked it, but Creed revitalized it all again. We have Apollo Creed's son just taking up the mantle from what Rocky had, and it's just a really, really great movie. And Creed 2 is really, really fantastic as well. If you haven't seen it, check out both these. Check out all the Rockies. Check out all the Rockies. They're all good. Even 5. Tommy Gunn's not the best, but it's still worth watching all of them. All right, next we're going to Alex Garland, who directed a really phenomenal science fiction film in Ex Machina. Now, this science fiction film, it kind of hits home and almost a little bit could possibly be in the future, about AI in particular. Now, this movie has Domhnall Gleeson in it and Oscar Isaac as well. But like I said, Alicia Vikander, the AI particularly in this movie, she steals the show. Now, this is more or less in Silicon Valley. Oscar Isaac is this rich inventor who's been cocooned himself making this AI, and he invites Domhnall Gleeson, who works for this tech company in the Silicon Valley, and just really crazy things happen. Domhnall Gleeson kind of falls in love with this AI, and it's this really, really great science fiction story, and I'm just going to let you watch it yourself if you haven't seen it. Ex Machina is worth your time, absolutely. So check out that film. Next, we're going to go to a film from Colombia, the country, and that is Embrace of the Serpent. I watched this movie at my local independent cinema theater, the Moxie here. It's black and white, and it tells a couple of stories from 2 different time periods, but with the same character as he's older and younger, dealing with some settlers from America and also I think Europe, and they're both after this particular plant that is more or less kind of this elixir for life, longevity of things, and so it's a really, really crazy psychedelic trip, and I highly recommend checking this movie out. It's really phenomenal. I need to watch more films like this, and I just really love the cinematography. I love how it's shot in black and white, and I wish more films were like this. If you haven't checked out Embrace of the Serpent, I'm putting that down in the description down below. It's just such a fantastic film. Anyway, that's a movie that I highly recommend. Next, we're going on to a Quentin Tarantino film, one of the best ones, especially to watch right now. It's The Winter Time, The Hateful Eight. This movie is just so fantastic. Ennio Morricone does a score for it. It's got a really great score. In fact, I think it's very reminiscent of The Thing, John Carpenter. But we have such a really stacked, fantastic cast with Samuel Jackson, we have Kurt Russell, Jennifer Jason Leigh, we have Walter Goggins, Demian Bichir, and Tim Roth, Michael Madsen, and Bruce Dern. This is just a bunch of folks coming to this cavern, a bunch of different people. We've got, like, you know, a sheriff, a hangman, a bounty hunter, a wanted convicted felon, and Jennifer Jason Leigh. It's such a really great movie, and it's such a slow burn, but it's so worth it, and the dialogue is just so sharp, so gritty, so worth it, and then you have just a really crazy ending. Very Tarantino, and absolutely one of my favorite films from Tarantino. It's one of the ones that I think a lot of people overlook, but I think it's one of the best films that Tarantino's ever done, particularly, and it's definitely rewatchable, at least for my particular tastes. So I love this movie. Check out Hateful Eight if you haven't seen it. We're going to go from there to another honorable mention, and The Lobster. This is directed by Yorgos Lanthimos. He's recently done The Favorite, which is one of my favorite movies of this current year. This is starring Colin Farrell. We also have Rachel Weisz in it as well, and we also have Steve Brule himself, John C. Reilly. Just such a fantastically dry black comedy that is just in this really surreal kind of in the middle of nowhere, and Yorgos is an interesting director, and you don't have to watch this movie to kind of understand what I'm talking about, but it's definitely presented straightforward, but it's a comedy. So check out that film if you haven't seen it. Next, we're talking about a film directed by a very old man, and George Miller. What a phenomenal piece of work here. Mad Max Fury Road. We have Charlize Theron taking up, you know, the main part of this movie. We also have Tom Hardy playing Mad Max, where we recently had Mel Gibson have that role for Mad Max. But this movie is about Furiosa. The practical effects in this movie are just top-notch. There's particular chase scenes. The chase scene is the whole damn movie. But, you know, it's just a fun ride. It's just such a fun movie in the desert in this post-apocalyptic era filled with no water. It's so good. Check out Mad Max Fury Road if you want. It's got a guy who plays guitar as they're like going 90 miles an hour in the desert. It's awesome. All right, now we're moving on to one of the prettiest movies of the year, Alexandre Iñárritu's The Revenant. This is the movie that won Leonardo DiCaprio the Oscar, finally, after so long. And we also have Tom Hardy in this movie as well. This movie is just gorgeous. A lot of people like it and dislike it. I actually happen to love it. It's just this nice Western in the snow with just phenomenal shots. The story is kind of, you know, cut and dry. You have Leonardo DiCaprio, who has an adopted Native American son, and Tom Hardy kind of kills him, and he seeks revenge against Tom Hardy and all the wrongdoings that he's done to him. So it's just a really, really nice Western, a revenge flick as well. So check out The Revenant if you haven't seen it. All right, last four honorable mentions. The first one being Son of Saul. This, if you've seen Schindler's List or Shoah, this is like that, but you're actually seeing a lot of the things go down. Schindler's List is actually, I think, a little bit tame compared to this movie. This movie is a foreign language film. I believe it's in Polish. I may be wrong. This film is a Hungarian film, and it's such a dark film. It's something that I don't really want to rewatch, but it's focusing on the concentration camps, and it's just a dark film, but it's one of those films I highly recommend you check out if you haven't seen it. All right, moving on to another intense film, but in a very different way, Sicario. This is, again, directed by Denis Villeneuve. This time is starring Emily Blunt and Benicio del Toro, as well as Josh Brolin. This movie is really, really intense. It's about the Mexican drug cartel. And I absolutely love this movie. The score is just so bellowing and just intense, and it's there. And I was on the edge of my seat when I saw this in theaters, and I just really loved Emily Blunt and Benicio del Toro's character. They're just at each other's throat. Emily Blunt having no idea what she was doing in this movie. As an actress, she knew what she was doing, but in the movie, she didn't know anything. Benicio del Toro more or less just breaking the line between what is right and wrong. Josh Brolin more or less letting it happen, but at the same time just like having a really fun time at it. It's really hard to describe. This movie is just really, really great. Honestly, I don't really like the sequel that much. I don't think it was necessary, even though I know that the writer, who is just phenomenal, wanted to make a sequel to it, even though I don't think it should have been made. But the first Sicario, just watch this one on its own, because it's really, really phenomenal. Alright, the movie that won Best Picture for this year, which I actually predicted, because I really loved it, was Spotlight. This is a really great movie, very reminiscent of All the President's Men, about really fantastic journalism. We got Mark Ruffalo in it, we have Birdman himself in it there, Michael Keaton, Rachel McAdams, Lee Schreiber, John Slattery, and Stanley Tucci. This movie is just about the Catholic Church and them hiding all of the more or less the fondling of and sexual misconduct of young boys and young girls, and it's really eye-opening, and it's just it's a story that's very real, and it's a thing that happened and is probably still happening, and definitely need to be made. And I thought this was just a really phenomenal film, definitely getting at the heart of something that is really sinister, and so it gave the spotlight, of course. Alright, last movie to talk about for honorable mentions. This one's a really dark and gritty one. Directed by Sean Baker, Tangerine. This movie I recently saw for the first time. I actually love this movie. I actually talked a little bit about it in my Weekend Six Pack recently, so I don't have to talk about it too much, but this is just a really, really gritty story of two individuals that are not likable by society whatsoever. They just, you know, they cross-dress and just do a lot of just ridiculous things throughout the city, at least to my standards, of course, you know. And so check out Tangerine if you haven't seen it, because it set the groundwork for Sean Baker to make Florida Project a little later on. All right, my favorite movie of 2015. This movie is so good, in my opinion. So what is my pick for 2015? That is The Witch. This movie is so intense, and I watched it in theater, and I was by myself. It was just a movie that crawled under my skin. I love everything about it. The atmosphere of this movie, it blows The Conjuring, Insidious, all those movies out of the water, just with the intense acting in this movie, where they actually got the dialogue for the Puritan era of this movie correctly, and got the atmosphere just drenched in everything that's built up, the music, the score, the cinematography, just the natural setting. It really got to me, and this is one of my favorite movies of the horror movies of probably the last 20 years. It's probably my favorite one, and this movie it opened my world up for those things that I really love, particularly in cinema, especially horror films. I love occult things. I love things that are really slow burning, atmospheric, and things that really just kind of just crawl under your skin. And this movie, I love the ending. I love everything that builds up to it. Some of it's a little cheesy. To me, I thought it was well worth this entire film. And I know this has a mixed reaction for a lot of people, but this is absolutely one of the best films in the last 20 years. It's one of those films that just set a new bar, at least in my opinion, for horror. So that was my pick for 2015. Let's move on to 2016. Alright, let's move on to 2016. Let's be real quick about this. 10 Cloverfield Lane. This is a really great film that's barely connected to the sci-fi universe of Cloverfield, but it is near the end of this mystery of John Goodman, who has Mary Elizabeth Winstead and John Gallagher Jr. down in his kind of bunker, kind of, you know, end times, kind of Cold War-like-esque thing. Some event happened, Cloverfield, you know, and they are there, and they are around company that you don't probably suspect in John Goodman. So check out that movie if you haven't seen it. Next is a movie that I thought was just a really awesome science fiction film. Once again, directed by one of my favorite directors, Denis Villeneuve. That is Arrival. This is one of the 4Ks I own. I absolutely really enjoyed this film, just from the aspects of just kind of like Interstellar, in the sense how humanity transcends time, and time is transmitted in different ways. And I really love how original, how language, particularly in this film, language transcends that boundary, how we communicate to each other and how we communicate with the rest of the universe as well. And I just thought it was a really clever film, directed by Denis Villeneuve, starring Amy Adams and Jeremy Renner, and Forrest Whitaker as well. Just the performance, especially by Amy Adams, is just top notch, and I honestly think she should have probably won for this year. Oh, actually, the person who won this year, I understand why they won. We'll talk about that in a second. But check out Arrival if you haven't seen it. This is a phenomenal film and definitely worth your time. All right, next film that we're going to talk about is a Marvel film, and it's one of my favorite characters of all time. I actually have him over there. Doctor Strange. This is a film that I actually did not have the biggest hopes up for because I heard that Scott Derrickson was doing it. He was the director of Sinister, which I enjoyed Sinister quite a bit, except for some of the elements about like the kids and stuff. But anyway, that's a different film. Doctor Strange, he's a horror film director, so I didn't really see him transition, but I actually was pleasantly surprised. Mads Mikkelsen is in this. Benedict Cumberbatch plays Doctor Strange himself. We also have Tilda Swinton as the Ancient One. I really love the Doctor Strange comics, and so I thought this was a really cool... they kind of took a little bit of Inception's bending of worlds and towers and cities, and used it for this film, and I really like that element about it, and I honestly thought this was a really fun film, definitely a breath of fresh air in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I know we talked about Blue Ruin a little bit earlier, but this is the follow-up to that, Green Room. This is one of Anton Yelchin's last films. Also has Patrick Stewart in it, and it's just this awful accident gone wrong. This band is playing in the middle of nowhere, and they see a murder happen, and they get caught up in the middle of it all, and it's such a really dark, gritty, kind of hyper-violent movie that is just definitely worth your time and is really fun. And eventually I'll get that damn sticker off with some Goo Gone or something. But yeah, check out Green Room if you haven't seen it. Alright, next is one of the best westerns that have come out in a long time, and that is Hell or High Water. This movie is damn good. Jeff Bridges is in it, Chris Pine and Ben Foster. Jeff Bridges is after these brothers, Chris Pine and Ben Foster, who are just, you know, robbing banks left and right. And it's just really great atmosphere put into this film, and just a lot of great dialogues and scenarios. You just see flesh out between these two brothers who kind of unhinged from the start. They're definitely not all on the same page, and it's a really great movie with a lot of really great characters that you love and hate. Next is the movie that got snuffed for the movie of the year, but I thought it was a really, really great movie because I don't like musicals that much, and that is La La Land. This is Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone, and this movie is just an unconventional kind of love story, but this in the old Hollywood sense, and it's a really nice kind of homage to the old musicals of the golden age of Hollywood, and so I definitely recommend checking out La La Land if you haven't seen it. It gets its musical numbers out of the way really early on, so that's what I recommend. Next is the movie that won the Oscar that I predicted. That is Moonlight. This is a really great story, really hard to watch story of three individuals who all play the same character in different time periods of his entire life. He's an African American who also happens to be gay, and it's just, you deal with all of the traumas, the familial dramas, a lot of the friendship, the dealings of his scenario where he lives, and the culture that he's been brought up in. It's just a really hard movie to watch, but at the same time, a really well executed. Barry Jenkins did a fantastic job here, and that's why he deserved the Oscar here, in my opinion. Next is the movie that didn't put Shane Black back a little bit, thanks Predator. But The Nice Guys. This movie's got Ryan Gosling and Russell Crowe. This movie is like Kiss Kiss Bang Bang Part 2 with some different cast members. This movie's freaking hilarious. It's just this slapstick kind of black comedy of these two detectives. One of them's a detective, and the other one is kind of like a hitman of some sort. But anyway, these guys are they're just nice guys. They're just trying to get the job done, and they uncover some crazy things going on. And I highly recommend checking out Nice Guys if you haven't seen it. It's one of the best movies of the year, and it's one of my favorite ones. It's really, really hilarious. All right, rounding out the last honorable mentions for 2016, we have Tom Ford's Nocturnal Animals. This is a really great film with Jake Gyllenhaal and Amy Adams. There's one particular scene in this movie that is like very uncomfortable, and you'll know what I'm talking about when you see it. This movie opens up with a really uncomfortable scene as well, but in a very different sense, and so there's not a bunch of slow burning dread with it. So this is actually a really, really great movie. I really enjoyed this take from Tom Ford, who is a designer who has directed another film which I have not seen yet. But anyway, yeah, check out Nocturnal Animals if you haven't seen it. All right, next is the movie that won Brie Larson the Best Actress Award for that year in the Oscars, and we have Room here. Not The Room, Room. This movie is a really hard movie to watch. It's a very impactful, very, very deep, and kind of terrifying concept of a film. We have a woman who was taken pretty early on and put into this room and had this kid, and this kid, all he knows is this entire room. That's his entire world. And then he notices they escape somehow, and then the outside world kind of just comes crashing in to this kid who knows nothing else. And this movie will make you cry. I cried a lot when I watched this movie, and I loved every moment of it. But at the same time, it's really gut wrenching. So check out Room if you haven't seen it. It's the movie that definitely won Brie Larson that Oscar, because she definitely deserved it for this performance, and it was just phenomenal. It's just a really great movie. All right, from kind of the more depressing side, we have the kind of the happier side of cinema with the coming of age film Sing Street. Now this is the movie. That is just a really, really lovely film that was under the radar for a long time, and I was told about it. It's this Irish film, this coming-of-age kind of just rock and roll story from like the love letter of the 80s. It focused a lot on The Cure and Duran Duran and things like that, coming out of England and Ireland. And a lot of these this moments is this kid who's just trying to impress a girl, and it's one of those movies that'll put a big smile on your face. Make it cry a little bit. There's all those fun things about this movie. So let's go on to our last honorable mention here. The last honorable mention is one of my favorite horror movies of all time. I've only seen it a couple of times, but this movie is worth every ounce of watching because it's a long one. It's The Wailing. This movie is a South Korean film that is just super dark, slow burning, but at the same time is filled with so much craziness because it's just constantly happening over and over and over again. To me, it's a mixture of The Exorcist and Silence of the Lambs. Like that's how I present this movie, with a little bit of occult-like things going on in the movie. It's just such a fantastic, horrific film. I believe it might be on Netflix. I don't exactly know. But if you haven't seen this movie, it's worth every single minute you watch it. It's a long one, like I said. The movie happens to be, let me look here, 157 minutes, so nearly 3 hours long, but it's worth every single minute. So, what does that leave for my favorite movie of 2016? Okay, so what does that mean for my pick for 2016? My favorite movie, just like The Room and the emotional level, it is Manchester by the Sea. This movie broke my heart when I watched it. This has Casey Affleck in it, and we have Michelle Williams, Kyle Chandler, and Lucas Hedges. This movie is about a broken family, it's a broken man in particular, who, as you see things unfold in this film, you see why he's so broken. It has a lot of flashbacks, it has a lot of current moments, and this movie is it's about this guy from the East Coast, and happens to take a lot of roads of a lot of real ordinary life that a lot of people have to deal with. And this is directed by Kenneth Lonergan, who is just a phenomenal director and writer. And this movie, like I said, it threw me out for a loop, and it made me tear up several moments. There's one particular moment I actually think it was the best scene in the entire year, and it happens to be kind of near this particular scene where Michelle Williams and Casey Affleck meet up, and they just accidentally bump into each other kind of midway through the film. It's a hard movie to watch, but it's absolutely the best movie of 2016 in my opinion. So I highly recommend checking out Manchester by the Sea. Let's move on to 2017. We only got 2 more years left. All right, for 2017, I got some honorable mentions. They're going to go by this kind of quickly. The first one being Brad's Status. I really enjoyed this movie. It kind of was under the radar type of film. I actually did a review of it last year. I really loved this movie for the fact that people need to be a little bit more grateful for the things that they have in their life. This particular one is one where a lot of people maybe cannot comprehend or get behind, but I really enjoyed the story itself of this father who's more or less lost his place in the world, trying to pretty much vicariously live through his son, and just letting him be his own man, his own person. Check out that film if you haven't seen it. Brad Status is a really good time, and Ben Stiller does a fantastic work there. Next is one of the funniest films of the year, a really good romantic comedy in The Big Sick. Kumail Nanjiani is a comedian, and you probably have seen some of his work. This movie is hilarious, and it's very heartfelt as well. Another movie that'll make you probably cry. It's kind of a real-life story between him and his girlfriend in real life, and so it's a really good one. Ray Romano does a great job, as does Holly Hunter as well. She does phenomenal. All right, next is probably my second favorite movie of the year, and it's just, I've seen it so many times, and I absolutely love it. I've read the book, and it's Call Me By Your Name. Luca Guadagnino directed this film with Armie Hammer and Timothée Chalamet. This movie is just another movie that made me cry quite a bit. It's such a nice little film about a romance that is kind of forgotten about in the 80s, that they don't know if it's right to love each other, but you know, it's something that unfolds and is natural. And there's two particular scenes in this movie that breaks your heart. And they're near the end of the film. So check out Call Me By Your Name if you haven't seen it. It's definitely one of the best movies of the year. It'll be remembered in 20 years. It'll probably be a Criterion someday. Next is my third favorite movie of the year, actually. I'm going kind of in alphabetical order, but I'm also have steelbooks in my hands. So this is actually before Call Me By Your Name. That is Blade Runner 2049. Denis Villeneuve, once again, proving how amazing a director this filmmaker is. Starting with Harrison Ford, the original person in Blade Runner, and we also have Ryan Gosling taking up the mantle. This is a really fantastic sequel. This movie is just, it has its own life. It doesn't rely on the original Blade Runner. It's its own separate thing. Obviously, it has connections to the original Blade Runner with Harrison Ford and whatnot, but this movie is just such a slow burn, but such a slow atmospheric build of a noir that is just so beautiful and so just well acted, and everything about it is I love it. I love Dave Bautista's work in it. I love a lot of things about this film, and I highly recommend checking out Blade Runner 2049. Next is one of the funnest Marvel movies that I've ever seen, and that is directed by Taika Waititi. We have Thor Ragnarok. Chris Hemsworth reprises his role Thor. This time he has a lot more lighthearted aspect about him, and it shows in this movie. And this movie is just phenomenal, and it's highly rewatchable, and it's really funny. Next is one of the better superhero movies of the year, but not my favorite particularly. That is Wonder Woman. DC finally got it right. This movie is really great, except for maybe the last act is a little paint by numbers, but I really love Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman, and she does a phenomenal job here playing this role. Alright, next is a movie directed by Edgar Wright, Baby Driver. He's finally taken an American kind of take of this car chase kind of film, and it's a really lovable film that has a lot of awesome action sequences, a lot of choreographed stunts, and a really great soundtrack. And I highly recommend checking out Baby Driver if you haven't seen it. Alright, talking about films that really made an impact on culture, Get Out. Jordan Peele, you know him of Key and Peele. He directed a movie about an African-American going to an all-white kind of neighborhood and situation, and how uncomfortable that is to a lot of the people living this particular situation. I have no idea anything about it, and honestly I can't really relate, but this is a hilariously dark take on that aspect of the film, and not trusting the people you're around. And so it's a really good movie. It's like a really, really great episode of Twilight Zone, and Jordan Peele is someone to watch out for, because this movie is just fantastic. And it's just fantastic performances by everyone around it. Next is the movie that was a pretty big runner-up for Best Movie of the Year, Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. So I've already talked a lot about Martin McDonagh. I love In Bruges, talked about it a lot. This is the follow-up of Seven Psychopaths. This movie threw me for a loop and had some amazing, I almost said hilarious, I don't know why, amazing performances by Frances McDormand. That's why she won the Oscar that year. She did such a great job. And so did Sam Rockwell, and that's why he won his role as well. Woody Harrelson as well, just blowing performances out of the water. And I know that Sam Rockwell actually came to Springfield, Missouri to kind of get an understanding of what Missouri actually was like. He rode around in some cop cars, and so that was a really interesting time period, because this does kind of reflect some of the smaller towns around me. I've talked a little bit about it in Winter's Bone. Missouri has a little bit of a problem with some of these things, but overall I don't think this was particularly accurate, but I really enjoyed the film because, you know, obviously it's Hollywoodized, and so I really love it. And also Martin McDonagh is from Ireland, so he doesn't probably know Missouri too well, but all I say is I digress. Let's move on to the next film. The next film is directed by P.T. Anderson. This is one of my favorite films of last year. Phantom Thread. This is just an amazing I'm putting things in quotes, by Daniel Day-Lewis, performance by him. And it's just such a phenomenal film of just this fashion designer and the work he makes, and it kind of ends in a nice little twist. And I hope you I hope you check this film out if you haven't seen it, because it's definitely worth your time. Phenomenal performance by Daniel Day-Lewis, but when is it not, really, honestly? Next is a movie that's pretty controversial, but I really love, and that is Mother. And this is with Jennifer Lawrence and Javier Bardem. This is directed by Darren Aronofsky. And at the time, I know Jennifer Lawrence and Darren were dating. They're not now, but this is a movie that has a lot of biblical implications. There's a lot of allegories involved, and it's very intense. And I love it, and it's talking about Mother Earth and a lot of other things. And I really, really enjoyed it, and I love that cover. And I think it's great. It makes you uncomfortable, and I hope that it makes you uncomfortable, because it's what it's meant to do. Next is the best superhero movie of the year, in my opinion, and that is Logan. This movie is just so wonderful. I love the frickin' trailer for this movie with Johnny Cash. It sold me immediately. And Patrick Stewart deserved an Oscar nomination for the Best Supporting Actor, in my opinion, for this particular movie. And it's the last movie we'll see Hugh Jackman as Wolverine in. And so it's a really nice payoff for, 2000 when he did X-Men. All those years later, seeing a payoff, a send-off for this character, it's so wonderful. And it's dark, it's gritty, it's a dark western. And it's a comic book movie. It's like The Dark Knight in how it's presented. It's so good. It's fantastic. All right, next we're moving on to a lighter film, but also not so light in the drama category, and that's Lady Bird. This movie is directed by Greta Gerwig and is starring Saoirse Ronan of this teen. It's like a coming-of-age story, but it's a more realistic, dark take on a coming-of-age story. And it's definitely comedic, but at the same time it's very serious about this girl who's dealing with her mother and her father and the problems that they're having, and this, where she's going to school and all the things she's doing, all the boys she's seeing, her friends, all that stuff. And so it's very relatable, and at the same time not relatable, because obviously I'm not a woman, but movies like this transcend that, and at least in my eyes, I think that this movie definitely speaks to a lot of us, and I think this movie was very honest and compelling. So thank you, Greta, for this. Next, we talked about Sean Baker with Tangerine. This is the first Sean Baker movie I actually watched. This is The Florida Project. Willem Dafoe knocks it out of the park, but so does Brooklyn Prince as the mother of this little girl. This little girl who I can't not remember her name for the life of me, and I'm going to look at it real quick. Kimberly Prince? I guess she was, Brooklyn Prince was her, and her mother, Bria Vanetti, were, non-actresses. So they really don't know acting as well as Willem Dafoe. So he had a lot of non-actors work with actors, and this movie is gorgeous, but a really dark, just like Tangerine, a very dark take. It focuses on members of society we don't really like to talk about, and that's something about this movie that I think is really compelling. And there's a lot of scenes in this particularly that speak to me Maybe not my particular experience, but at least on a connectivity level. So I highly recommend checking out Florida Project if you haven't seen this movie. Next, we're moving on from there to one of the best endings to a trilogy, and a trilogy that's criminally underrated in my opinion. That is War for the Planet of the Apes. This Planet of the Apes trilogy that got revamped. Thank goodness, because the Tim Burton one was not that good. But you know, we have Caesar, we have Andy Serkis playing this character for the last, you know, since 2011, I think, roughly around that time period. And you just see the phenomenal work he's done here. And then the CGI is just, it's next level. And the story is really, really great. And you have a lot of really memorable characters. And you have just a really great cast and crew involved with this movie. So I thought this was a really great film. And I highly recommend checking out all of the Planet of the Apes films if you haven't seen any of them. Next is the movie that I saw on a triple feature when I went to Kansas City. And the first one I saw was Darkest Hour. And this movie blew me out of the water. I thought that Joe Wright did such a fantastic job of directing this beautiful piece. Obviously helmed by Winston Churchill right here himself, Gary Oldman, who obviously won the Best Actor for the year. And I actually I believe that, and I think he deserved it. This movie is really great, even though it might be a little bit Hollywoodized, of course, but you know, it was leading up to what Britain would do against the Nazis in World War II, and so you get to see a lot of that drama unfold, and it's just really phenomenal cinematography. And I would highly recommend checking out Darkest Hour if you haven't seen it. Next is a movie that'll make you cry because it's Disney Pixar, and that's Coco. This movie is just a really great repertoire added to the Disney franchise. It's just a really great story of music, of someone who doesn't want to, a family who doesn't like music whatsoever, and this kid who's trying to get back to the living because on the Day of the Dead he crosses over and has to get back, and that's more or less the premise of the story, trying to figure out who his grandfather was. And it's really great, and it's a story about family. And it's a story about caring about blood a little bit at the same time, but making your own family as well. And so it's a really heartfelt story, and I highly recommend Coco, and it'll make you cry. So that's really good too. All right, last three films of 2017, then we can get to our final favorite film. Loving Vincent. Currently, there is At Eternity's Gate, which is a Willem Dafoe-led telling of Vincent van Gogh's story, but this movie is just beautiful. This movie was designed by 100 different painters. Every image and still was a different painting. It was so much time was spent into this kind of dramatized, fictional storytelling of Vincent van Gogh's life. It was a little bit based on history. I think a lot of it based on history, but I couldn't tell you. But it's just visually a stunning movie, and just a fantastic first time this kind of film something like this was made. And so it's worth it alone just to watch the paint strokes on this film. So check out that movie if you haven't seen it. Next is the movie that won the Best Picture, and that is Shape of Water. And this is a gorgeous steelbook that just got released here on 4K. This is the movie that Del Toro kind of returned to form with Pan's Labyrinth. I've seen this a few more times, and I didn't like it as much the first time I watched it, but it's grown on me quite a bit. There's really great performances by everyone involved in this movie. It's this really nice dark fairy tale during the Cold War with just a really fantastic score, and just all about love, honestly, and love transcending boundaries. And Del Toro puts his stamp in there. It even has an homage to old Hollywood. It has like a dance number in it. It's really, really cool, an imagined dance number. So it's a really, really fantastic movie, and I recommend checking out it multiple times. It gets better, in my opinion. All right, so the last honorable mention I have here in my hand is Wind River. So I talked about Sicario a little bit. I didn't talk about how Sheridan, which I can't think of his first name, Taylor Sheridan, was a screenwriter for Sicario, and Hell or High Water as well. Wind River is the first movie he directed and wrote. This is an intense film with Jeremy Renner and Elizabeth Olsen in the Wyoming wilderness, and it's on a reservation. and it's just a very dark film, and a lot of things, especially in Taylor Sheridan's writing, a lot of things kind of just happen like that. Just it snaps and it happens, and it's really, you don't expect it at all. And so check out Wind River and you'll know what I'm talking about. So let's talk about my favorite movie of 2017. My favorite movie of 2017 was Ghost Story. A Ghost Story was directed by David Lowery, who I've talked about a couple of times. This is starring Rooney Mara and Casey Affleck. We saw them earlier with Ain't Them Body Saints. They return again with the same director. This movie spoke to me a lot. This movie was very intense. I watched it in the theater by myself, and it kind of took me away from what I was doing that day. And honestly, I'm getting emotional about talking about it. I have a lot of connection to this movie. I even wrote my thesis with this in mind. I actually talked about it a little bit in there. With the record store that I used to work at that closed down with me. This movie is a lot of it is based on space and time, connection to a place, a particular place, and people involved as well, and love, of course. Casey Affleck dies in the very beginning. He was married to Rooney Mara, and you see right here, this Scooby-Doo-like Beetlejuice-looking character is in the background of most shots. It's Casey Affleck in a bedsheet. And that sounds really silly, but it's executed very, very well. And highly recommend checking out Ghost Story. It is my favorite movie of 2017. It's a personal favorite of mine, and I absolutely highly recommend it. It's a very slow burn. There's one particular scene in it that gets a lot of people of Rooney Mara eating a pie. It takes like 5 minutes. It makes you feel the time pass. And that's what makes this movie so damn good. Not very many films kind of test your patience, and I think this movie is one of those films that, if you're in a hurry, don't watch this movie. If you want to sit there and digest what's going on in the movie, and like really want to pay attention to it, this movie will test your patience, and it's really worth your time. So check out Ghost Story if you haven't. It's my favorite movie of 2017. So for 2018, I decided not to do any honorable mentions, because I'll probably be doing a top 10 later on either this next week or whenever I put together a video. But I will say, I want to do, not cheat you on my pick for 2018. I do want to say what my favorite right now currently is, because there is a few things I haven't seen, because it's not the end of the year yet. And also some of the things haven't come to me around this area, and so I haven't seen a lot of the movies. So I will tell you my favorite movie so far this year. So my favorite movie so far in 2018 is Paul Schrader's First Reformed. Ethan Hawke did such a phenomenal job in this film, playing this pastor at a church in New England, one of the oldest churches in that area. More or less turns into a souvenir shop. And you have another church it's kind of like a sister church, but it's like definitely a big, giant kind of big church, mega church. And his ex-wife works there, but Amanda Seyfried, or whatever her name is, she is a member of his congregation, and her husband, who is a former eco-terrorist, maybe still possibly is, got out of jail, and she wanted him to talk to her husband. And this is the very, very beginning of the film, and you kind of see Ethan Hawke's character unfold as he's like monologuing internally, as he's writing these things down. He's journaling his past experiences, what he's been thinking about currently, and a lot of the things dealing with a lot of spiritual matters, and also matters of whether or not I should be a shepherd of the earth, caring for the earth. And there's so many dimensions to this film that it spoke to me when I watched it. Kind of similar to A Ghost Story. It's definitely shot in the same frame. It pays attention to detail, and it's a slow burn of a film, and it really is a film that tests your patience as well. And it's one of those films that I think really makes you think, and it's a film that will stick with you absolutely. If you test your own patience and watch this film, you'll understand what I mean. It'll leave you with questions. It'll leave you, especially the ending, will leave you with like a whoa, what the hell's going on here? So that being said, First Reformed is my favorite movie so far of 2018. It might change, it might not. So that's it. That was the end of my 100 years of movies. I probably made this video a lot longer, and I hope you made it all the way to the end. But thank you so much for checking out this series. There's been ups and downs with it. I'm not fully articulate with every single thing that I want to talk about, and sometimes I talk a little bit too long about my honorable mentions, so I apologize for that. But I want to thank you so much for such a fantastic year. 2018 was fantastic for film, and so was 1918 all the way up to this particular point, in my opinion. So I want to hear your thoughts. What are your picks for 2012 all the way to 2018? I want to hear your picks down below. Thank you so much for checking this video out. Give this video a like, comment down below. Don't forget to share this video and also subscribe, and I'll see you next time. I'm not jonesing around.